Hello everyone, I'm Sara Sach. Welcome back to my crochet channel. And welcome to another edition of This or That and Sometimes the Other Thing. And what we're going to talk about today is the other thing. Alrighty, so what we're going to talk about is this last week I put out a scarf pattern. This is the scarf. This is our back to school scarf. It goes with our back to school beanie that's right on there. All three of those are actually from that pattern. But what usually happens when I put out a scarf or a cowl or an infinity scarf, or also called a Mobius scarf, I always get questions that say, how wide should I make it? How long should I make it? Should I put the ends together? Should I make it smaller? You know, all kinds of questions about scarves and cowls and Mobius and infinity scarves and the differences and how do I do this, that, or the other thing. And so I thought I would talk about that today. It's a really important subject because it really depends on the person's height, the person's age. Sometimes they prefer one thing or the other, and what they're going to use it for. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to discuss cowls, infinity scarves, which are also called Mobius scarves, and then regular scarves, inches and things like that, just so that we get an understanding of what sizes we should make and how we can come about knowing that. All right? All righty. All right, so let's talk about some of the different kinds of scarves. Well, first this is the one we just made. We have just a regular scarf. It's just a long rectangle. We wrap it around our neck, tie it around, keeps us warm, makes us look stylish. And this one is gorgeous because it's done in this ombre. All right, so that's just your basic scarf. Then we have what's called a cowl. And a cowl is made in a tube. And the intention of the cowl really is to wear it where it's really cold and pull it up over your nose, your mouth, you know, for skiing or playing in the snow or just trying to get out of the house during snow and ice and things like that. But they can also be very stylish as well. This one I think is called the snow tipped, something like that, cowl. I'll put the link for these if you want to find them. And of course, this is our back to school scarf. And then this is our cozy grandma scarf. And this is actually a Mobius or a infinity. And what that means is we put the two ends together and we stitch them together. They do form a large tube, but it also has a twist. Now, you can also make a scarf and not put the twist in there, and then that's just a joined scarf. But if you put the twist in, which I really love the twist when you're wearing it and it twists in the front, looks really pretty, that's called a Mobius or a infinity scarf. All right, and these are just some of the scarves. There's also a triangle scarf that's made similar to a shawl. It's only smaller and you wear it with the triangle in the front, which is nice because it can keep your neck opening warm as well. But today we're basically going to talk about these types of scarves. All right, so since this is the one that I just put out there, the basic scarf, we're going to talk about it first. And the questions that I get on it all the time is, how wide should I make it and how long should I make it? All right, and so I found a couple of different places that I had put in some of my blogs before, and I'm going to move these for right now because we're going to come back over to this other camera. But I want to show you something that I made, and please don't criticize my drawing. All right, so here is something that will help you when it comes to knowing how long to make the scarf. Whether you're making this for a child or an adult, the length of the scarf is typically the height of the person or their arm span. They actually measure pretty much the same. All right, so however tall a person is or how wide their arm span is is the length that you should make it. So here's an example. If you're making this for a 6-foot man, make your scarf 6 feet long. If you're making this for a child that measures 3 feet, make the scarf 3 feet long. It's that seems to be the consensus throughout the internet, is that the length of your arm span or the length of your height, which should be pretty much the same, is how long you should make a scarf. And I wrote on here, test it out. I did. I tested it out. I measured my span. I used to be 5'4". I'm now 5'2", by the way. So I'm 5'2", and my arm span also shrunk to 5'2", which I think is really funny. All right, and so that's the length of a scarf if you're making one like this. Okay, now for the width. According to what I have here, you want to make it between 6 and 8 inches wide. And sometimes that's determined by preference, but it can also be determined by the stitch pattern. If you have a pattern that has so many shell stitches or open stitches, it might need to be a little wider or a little shorter. And this is really just a preference. For a younger child, I would probably go more with a 6 inch. But for a youth to adult, I would go with 8 inches. And this one happens to be 8 inches. Okay, now as far as your other ones, let's talk about the Mobius here, because this one is also 8 inches wide. And the length of this one is also determined by this. Okay? The only difference is you either stitch the two ends together or you make a twist and then put them together. And some Mobius and Infinity scarves are stitched on the long. And so you'll stitch as many rows as needed for the width of your scarf. Okay? Now the cowl is a little bit different because it is a lot taller. They're usually about 12 to 14 inches tall. And then the width of this is usually about 20 to 40 inches. And of course, that is determined by the person you're making it for. And sometimes it's a preference. And a cowl can also be very long. It can be long and draped down onto the front of the person as well. Sometimes we just call it a cowl if it is a Mobius that has not been twisted. In other words, we've made it, we put the ends together, it does droop down, but the ends are together. So that is a whole lot of information when it comes to just making a scarf, right? And a lot of times we just follow the pattern. And I do. You know, if I'm making somebody else's pattern, I just follow their pattern. But the thing is, it is important to know who you're making it for and what size you're going to make it. Because if you make it 8 inches wide and make it 6 feet long, it's not going to fit that 5-year-old kid, okay? They're going to go, I can't wear this. This drapes the ground. And so making sure you measure, and I know I mentioned this when I did the hat video, to have your tape measure around, because it is important to measure as you go. You know, for instance, let's just talk about this cowl. It's a little bit different. And the average person who wears these usually is a youth to adult, but that doesn't mean a child wouldn't like to have one. And so you might want to make it not quite so wide and not quite so deep. And that's a preference. And most of the time when you're doing a pattern like this, you can do just less rows to make it shorter. And you can do less stitches around. But you'll have to follow the pattern. And if they have the multiples on there, that makes it even better. Now, when it comes to adjusting the Mobius that is hooked together, or what we call also the Infinity, you can just do less rows and then hook them together, or twist it and then hook together. And it's the same thing with just your basic scarf. This one, you're going to do less repeats because we're doing repeats. Okay? And that's where you want to measure as you go. And I know a lot, I can't tell you how many people will tell me, I never measure anything. I don't see that it's necessary. And that's okay. If you don't want to measure, it's totally okay. For me, I learned from the very beginning to keep a tape measure everywhere. I have them in all my project bags. I have them in all of my places where I sit and crochet. And I have them all the places where I design patterns. And I have probably 10 of them in this room in different places. And some of them I can't find. This one here, I've had it forever. And I always keep it on this desk so that I always can measure as I go. Because for me, when I'm making something for somebody and I don't want it not to fit. All right. And so let me just go back through this real quick and just give you some basics on the measurements. All right. So for our regular scarf and our Mobius and Infinity scarf, they are usually between 6 and 8 inches wide. And for smaller children, you're going to do less. For, youth to adult, you'll do more. That doesn't mean if somebody wants a 10-inch one that you can't make it 10 inches. That just means you have to add more stitches. Okay? But they're usually between 6 and 8 inches. And 8 inches is what I usually do for a youth to adult. Now, as far as the length, measure their arm span or know their height and make it that length, whether it's a child to an adult, okay? Because like it says, the length of the scarf is typically the height of the person or the arm span. They actually do measure about the same. And test it out. I did, like I told you, okay? And that's what you can do with both your Mobius Infinity scarf or your regular scarf. Now with the cowl, it's a little bit different. You don't want the cowl. I mean, you could make it a cowl that's that long, but then it would be a Mobius, right? So when you're making a cowl, it's a little bit different, and it is still considered a scarf. It's just called a cowl. Okay. The cowl is a long or short tube connected, similar to a Mobius. You don't twist it though. We don't twist a cowl. All right. And so a cowl is usually between 20 and 40 inches around. I usually make mine about 24 inches. I do. And you can see how that will fit. Okay. And then you're going to do here, your inches are going, okay, so the difference here is you want it to be between 20 and 24 inches around. And then here is kind of determined by the pattern. I'm going to measure this one real quick because I don't have the measurement on that. I thought I had it on here. All right. That's good to know. This one is 10 inches. 10 inches. Okay. And I like this size. I hadn't measured it lately, so I was going to say 12, and that just didn't seem right to me. All right. So we're talking that it's usually 20 to 40 inches around, depending on what kind you're making. But I usually do 24, and then it's 10 inches tall. Okay? And of course, that's just me. And one thing you're going to find when you're out there searching for cowls and scarves and, Infinity scarves and Mobius scarves, what you're going to find is all of those meanings and all of those names are interspersed and sometimes interchangeable. Okay, someone may call it just a scarf and it's a cowl, or they might call it a twisted scarf, meaning a Mobius. I used to call them twisted scarves because that's what I thought they were. I never heard the term Mobius or Infinity. I knew what an Infinity sign was, but I never had heard the scarf called that until about probably 20 years ago. Okay, and so don't get frustrated if the terms are intermingled or interchangeable or whatever. That doesn't really matter that much. I had one person just tell me I need to use all the proper terms, but I'm not really that proper, so I just want to have fun in crochet, and I want you to have fun in crochet also. All right, so the bottom line is don't worry about what they call it. If this is what you're making and they call it a Mobius scarf, it's okay. Just make it anyway and have fun, and sometimes I'll call a long scarf a cowl because it's just a tube. I didn't twist it, And so those terms are interchangeable. But what we were talking about today basically is sizing. And A lot of times the sizing is preference. But I did want to give you, some ways of determining how to make those sizes. And the thing is, when you're making, like even a Mobius where you have repeated rows, a scarf with repeated rows, you can adjust that length so easy just by doing more or less. Like this one would be more or less repeats. And like this one where you have these sections of double crochet and granny square, you could probably just, count and do less rows without any problem at all. And as far as this one, it does have some repeat rows. Looks like you've got 2-row repeats. You could do more or less rows to make it shorter. Okay. And so those are some things that you can do to kind of adjust that, because every time I put out a scarf, I get tons of people that message me and say, I'm making this for a 5-year-old. How can I adjust this? Or I'm making this for a really tall man. What should I do? And so these are really simple things that you can do. You may have to adjust the pattern a little bit for when you're doing in the round. But when you're doing a long one, you can, because you're stitching back and forth, you can do less rows. And you can also do less stitches, but you're going to have to make sure that you figure out that pattern. I do try to put either the pattern sequence or multiples or inches so that you can adjust that on most of my patterns. I don't always do it because sometimes I don't want you to adjust it. If it's a set type pattern, like a shawl or something. Okay, but I do try to put that in there, and usually it's on, when you find my videos on YouTube, underneath every one of my videos, I have a link that will take you to the blog that has a ton of information, probably too much information. I did have someone tell me I give too much information; it's overwhelming. Okay, and so I do try to do that for you. Okay, so that's what our topic is for today. Please feel free to comment things that have worked for you, in adjusting patterns, and how you determine, what size you're going to make and things like that. Because this isn't set up like small, medium, large. You just have to go by measurements. And that's why it's so important, so important. I'm going to say this again. Measure, measure, measure as you go, go, go. Measure, measure, measure as you go, go, go. Okay? It's so important. And it just surprises me that people don't ever measure. I think it's frustrating to make a whole project, and then when you measure it, it's not anything like the project measurements. Okay, and sometimes you have to adjust your tension and your gauge because you're stitching too loose or too tight. And sometimes if you're watching a scary movie, you're stitching tighter because it's intense, or you're watching a movie that helps you relax, or you're just listening to music or a book recording you're listening to, and just crocheting away and you're relaxed, your stitches get looser. And so those are things to keep in mind when making scarves and hats or absolutely anything. All right, so feel free to comment, and remember, you can ask any question that you want. If I don't have an answer, I'll do my best to try to find that answer. Okay, and remember, there are no wrong questions, there are no wrong answers, as long as it has to do with crochet and yarn and things. Okay, don't ask me why the grass is green and why the leaves turn colors and fall. I don't know that stuff. I probably could find you an answer, though. All right, well, that's what I've got for you today. Thanks for being with me, and I'll see you next time for another edition of this or that or the other thing. All righty, bye-bye now.